You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Today's episode is brought to you by Codify. Visit them on the web at www.codify.com. Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 54. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talked to Dr. Doug Scott about experimental archaeology and doing live fire exercises with historic weaponry. Let's get to it. All right, so welcome to the show, everyone. I don't have a co-host today. Everybody either wasn't available or Skype simply would not allow it. So sometimes we have Skype issues like that, but that's okay. But I have Dr. Douglas Scott on, and we talked a couple weeks ago about some of the things he's doing. But first, welcome, Doug, to the show.
Well, thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Awesome. And we're going to talk about this some experimental archaeology you've been doing. And in our call that we had a couple weeks ago to just kind of talk about this, we had discussed basically experimental archaeology with historic archaeology, which you don't often hear about, quite frankly, at least not in my circles. You always hear about prehistoric experimental archaeology. But before we get into that, why don't we set the baseline, and why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself and what your background is?
Essentially, I'm a retired archaeologist, although I haven't retired from the profession. I just retired from my regular job. And for over 30 years, I was a public servant archaeologist with the Department of Interior, both the Bureau of Land Management and the National Park Service. I think most people are aware of some of the things I might have done if they don't know who I am, and that's directing the archaeology of the Little Bighorn battlefield and a number of other conflict studies around the world, dealing with American Indian Wars, Revolutionary War, and the Civil War, as well as being involved in forensic archaeology, using some of those same techniques we developed in conflict studies to deal with human rights, kind of mass grave studies on people who were killed in warfare, allegedly warfare, but oftentimes illegal executions in various countries. And I've worked in Croatia and Bosnia and Cyprus, as well as Rwanda, and even worked on a dog welfare case in Canada a few years back.
Yeah, that's one of the things we talked about in our call before was conflict archaeology, and I think that's going to be a whole separate episode at some point in the future.
Well, it's a big field these days. Yes.
Yeah, it really is. Okay, well, let's talk about some of the experiments you've been working on, particularly the live fire experiment. Why don't you tell people, what does that mean for people that don't really know what we're even talking about? What is a live fire exercise?
A live fire experiment or live fire archaeology experiment is simply using firearms in this particular case and literally firing them with full charges and bullets into various media in order to find out what those bullets do and see how that relates to what we find and actual conflict or hunting sites or other places that firearms were used. And as you well know, Chris, experimental archaeology has emerged in recent years as a very rigorous approach to the study of material culture and reflections of human behavior. And that's what it's all about. It's understanding how our artifactual material reflects human behavior and human decision making. It's an increasingly refined field that lets archaeologists develop insights and methods for making behavioral interpretations of the archaeological record. And in our case, studying firearms, archaeologists need to design and carry out appropriate experiments and draw on technical methods developed by forensic firearm examiners, engineers, and physicists, for that matter. And an example being the recent battlefield archaeology investigations, that's given us new impetus to study rifling characteristics of historic rifled weapons and the external ballistic capability of those firearms, and which translates to the combat efficiency of those arms, and in turn literally translates into the archaeological record and what we recover. So it's a reverse engineering approach to things. Firearms have always been, at least since the colonization of the New World, a significant vector, if you will, of political, ecological, and cultural change. Guns entered the New World, even though we see them as old matchlocks or whatever folks might want to see them as. Arquebus is rather crude technology, but they are, for their age and date, a very refined technology. And that technology, that ability to have propel a bullet at long distances as opposed to a bow and arrow or a lance or a spear, was a causal factor in our post-Columbian and post-contact period developments in the New World. And it may be hunting, it may be combat, but it deeply affected the manner in which colonization occurred, and also generally the ecology of the New World.
Back to the firearms that you're using. Are these reproductions, or are they actual historic artifacts?
In the recent live fire experiment that we did, we were trying to evaluate the external ballistic performance of a series of colonial firearms, Revolutionary War in all effect. We did use reproductions. These reproductions are handmade by skilled gunsmiths who literally replicated certain specific firearms, not just a generic model. These are not factory-made weapons. These are gunsmiths making them, and they come as close to looking like and firing like an original 18th century firearm as we can possibly get.
Nice. And what kind of firearms are we talking about here? Are these like, I don't honestly know a whole lot about it, and I'm not sure some people in the audience might either. Are these like a handgun type of thing, or more of a rifle type of thing, or what?
Well, we fired 7 different types of weapons, and these were all flintlocks, and they're all shoulder-fired weapons, so we would call them muskets or Fowlers. And they commonly represent guns that were used during the French and Indian Wars as well as the Revolutionary War, and for all practical purposes, a little before and a little after that. So it's, they're from mid 18th century to early 19th century kinds of weapons. They're all custom-made replicas. One we had was a colonial Fowler, which could be used as a colonial farmer or could use it as a shotgun for taking down birds or small game, or put a ball in it, a round ball, and of a bore size, and it would take down larger game or people. And these Fowlers represent what the colonial militias were using, and the Minuteman companies, such as on April 19, 1775. We also employed 2 British Longland pattern Brown Besses. One is a 1742 pattern, the other 1756, both in 76 caliber, so slightly over 3/4 of an inch in diameter bullet. And they represent the standard British firearms used in colonial America, particularly in the French and Indian Wars and the American Revolution. Another common British gun of the era, which we also had a replica of, was an artillery carbine. And it was literally designed for artillerymen to have, but slight variations of it also represent the British officer's fusil or musket and the British sergeant's carbine. We think of a carbine today as a very short-barreled weapon. These are fairly long, and a lot of people would see them if they were in a display case someplace as sort of a short musket. They're essentially a .65 caliber, 6/6500ths of an inch in diameter bore, and they were carried by in slight variations in external furniture of as British sergeants or officers or artillerists. There was a convenient one to use for us as it was readily available. 2 others were French guns, the 1728/41, and these designations are very particularistic, but it means it's a 1728 production model modified to a 1741 pattern, and a 1763 pattern modified to a 1766. So these are, again, French and Indian Wars and American Revolution era weapons that were French patterns, that they were imported into the colonies, the American colonies, for use in both on both sides of the conflicts, both French and Indian War and the Revolution, but mainly by the Americans. The seventh gun we had is a Haitian Potsdam musket, model 1740, as in 73 caliber. And I should mention the French and Indian. Well, the French guns are 68 caliber to 69 caliber. They vary slightly. And then the Potsdam musket 1740, which would be the type carried by the Haitian units recruited by the British, sometimes called mercenaries, is a 73 caliber. So we had just literally full range of the larger caliber weapons used by the American colonists during the Revolution and the British in the process of fighting one another during the Revolution.
Nice. All right. So how did you set up the experiment? What were the mechanics of it?
Well, mechanically, it's very simple. We have gunpowder, we have lead bullets. We did purchase modern gunpowder, modern black powder, made by a Swiss company. They've been making gunpowder in that area of Switzerland for 350 years, so I think they know what they're doing. That was just one way to control one variable, which is a quality gunpowder. We can't replicate 18th or 19th century gunpowders very well. Mm-hmm. We set up a firing range, 100 yards long, which had a sand berm in front of it and target frame. And then behind it was a log palisade made of hard maple, live oak, and loblolly pine, kind of simulate a fortification or a blockhouse that might have been built during French and Indian Wars, or even the Revolutionary War in some cases. So we want to know what bullets, if they pass through the berm or over the berm and they hit the logs, what would happen? Would they penetrate? Would they bounce off? Would they embed? Whatever they do. So that was part of it. The lead bullets were actually quite critical, so we ordered them from a company that hand cast them with the same kind of lead. And we actually did a portable X-ray fluorescence analysis on the lead to know what the trace elements are, so we can compare them to historic period bullets that have been found. And these are all spherical round balls. We weren't using any conical modern bullets. It was all the round ball, and that's the essence of it, except for the really cool part. We set up, thanks to a aimed research company, a phantom high-speed camera, which allowed us to do about 6,000 frames per second of shooting, so we could actually see what these bullets were doing as they flew through the air or hit the media. Well, that also allowed us to get the chronograph, so I got the velocity of the bullet. Gotcha. And then we also fired into a ballistic media. It's called clear ballistics, and it's a clear block of gelatin that has the same density as human tissue. And it allows, when the bullet goes in, you can actually see the cavitation occurring, assuming it would not hit bone or something like that. And so you see the process of this cavitation, and then the bullet either stopping or embedding in it. And then it allows us to kind of, and we can ascertain the bullet velocity entering, and if it leaves the media and heads on down range, we can get the exit velocity, so we can tell how much energy is lost in the process. And the methods we follow were very similar to what modern firearms examiners do, in having to do shooting incident reconstruction to figure out what a bullet does or does not do in an actual shooting incident.
Yeah, I feel like anybody that's seen Mythbusters over the last 15 years knows what that like ballistic gel stuff looks like. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. We may have used a different brand than they use, but that doesn't matter. It's a standard that's used throughout the world, and in our case matches a FBI standard for penetration and density and so forth.
Gotcha. You mentioned that the firing range was 100 yards long. Did you fire every weapon at 100 yards, or was that just the maximum length you had? Because that seems like a long ways for Revolutionary time period to me.
Well, yes, it does for, I think, a lot of people, but those bullets do go that far and further. When you think of a Revolutionary War battle, most people did not fire their weapons under one or at 100 yards or greater. It would be desperate to do that because the accuracy of the weapons was not that great, although we did find an exception to that. And so we just set it up as it was just a standard. And then, we did also at the ballistic gelatin, we fired that or shot at it from a 25-yard range, to be more typical of the last discharge of an attack line before they did a bayonet charge. So 25 to 35 yards was pretty common. And that just gave us some just basic information. And then during the Revolutionary War, the basic tactics were volley fire. It was not truly aimed fire like we do today.
Gotcha.
In fact, when a British command was given to stand on a line roughly almost shoulder to shoulder with one or two ranks of men behind you within 18 inches to 36 inches, then the command was ready, present, fire. There was no term aim used in the British Army or the American colonials in the 18th century. It was you just leveled your gun and shot, because there except for riflemen, and we were not firing rifled weapons at this particular experiment.
All right. Well, I want to ask you about any surprises that you had, but with just a minute left in the segment, I think we'll finish the segment here and just take a little bit extra time on the next segment. So we will be back in about 30 seconds. But first, here's a message from Codify, one of our sponsors for today's episode. Back in a second. Today's episode is sponsored by Codify. Check them out on the web at www.codify.com. That's www.codify.com. Now back to the show. All right. So we've talked about how you set up the experiment, what you were testing, and things like that. So what were some of the results and possibly some of the surprises that came from this experiment?
The whole process of doing this was fascinating. I grew up firing modern firearms as well as doing some experimenting and even limited, very simple competition with black powder guns as a youngster and young adult. So I was familiar with this stuff. And what came out of us that certain things were expected. When we fired these British muskets, the two different versions of them, well, even the three versions, counting the carbine or fusil, they fired just like would be normal. About every 20 shots, we had to replace a flint. That's not a surprise. They wear out. Once in a while, we had what's called a hang fire or a misfire, where either the powder in the pan didn't go off, the flint didn't strike the steel or frizzen hard enough. That actually did happen in the past. It happened to us. We had to readjust the term flash in the pan is when this flint hits the steel, sets the charge off in the pan, but doesn't transmit into the bore and send the bullet down the line. But we had those kind of things happen. We took appropriate safety precautions for those kind of situations. But those were real live, real world situations. And we observed those and made note of those. Firing the bullets on those British weapons, it was pretty interesting. In one sense, is that although we were not shooting for accuracy, the result was that we found the bullets were literally all over the map. They would generally hit in the area of the target, but were not really good for accuracy. But then again, the British were trying for volley fire, massed amounts of lead flying through the air, and so the guns were not not particularly accurate. And the farther out the range, the less accuracy, which is no surprise. The interesting thing is those 73 to 75 caliber, so 3/4 inch diameter bores in the guns used a .69 ball in them, and that was pretty typical because there were variations in bore size, and so they kept the ball smaller, allowing for windage, capability of loading. As the guns got dirty, they fouled. So that's not unexpected results from the firing. So that was pretty interesting. They also fired at a lower velocity than I had kind of anticipated. We could reach around 1,000 feet per second, near speed of sound, but not quite in most cases. The French guns were actually, we allowed for windage in those too. That's what the difference in the bore size and the bullet size is called. That worked out real well. And they fired more accurately and had higher velocities. But the really surprising gun was the 58 caliber Thomas Earl Fowler. It was a copy of the Thomas Earl gun, which was actually Earl was a gun maker who actually made weapons for George Washington and other folks. But typical of a Fowler, a long small caliber gun, small in a relative sense. It was 58 caliber. Whether we load with a cartridge using a .52 ball or a full bore size ball without cartridge, without paper as a wadding at 5.8, we were exceeding 1,100 feet and up to almost 1,500 feet per second in firing, which is huge. I mean, that's supersonic. And the range and the accuracy was incredible. Even though, again, I want to emphasize we did not shoot for accuracy, but almost everybody who fired that gun could put a bullet on a piece of paper, even it may not be in the formal black of the target. It was on the paper. So I decided I wanted to be a colonial militiaman, and I wanted to be one of the Minutemen. Hiding in the woods, because I think I could have done a better job. But that was a remarkable find. One of the things we did when we fired into the ballistic gelatin, we fired the Fowler and the French gun and the British gun, and the all at 25 yards with their full charge. And we can go into the black powder charges. We varied them according to the gun and the type of charge that historically would have been used, the amount of gunpowder behind the bullet. But all of them at 25 yards, we put 2 blocks of ballistic gelatin to end on end. So it was a 6x6 inch face that we shot at. And we put 2 of them in, and so we had 32 inches, 16 inches each. So we had 32 inches of ballistic gelatin, figuring, well, the bullets will capture them as they go in, because that's these things are not that high velocity, relatively speaking, to modern stuff. We actually put a simulated uniform cloth on the front. It's actually a broadcloth. It's to simulate the coat that the men would wear, lined with serge, with a waistcoat underneath, which is also broadcloth lined with serge, and then a linen shirt. So we had a thickness of cloth that these bullets would have to go through. And whether it was the Fowler, the French guns, or the British guns, when we fired them at 25 yards, they would completely penetrate and exit 32 inches of gelatin, which means you could take two people out if you were shooting at a rank of soldiers.
Wow.
And the velocity was actually enough that when it went into the gelatin and lost energy, of course, going through that, and exited, it still had enough power to go downrange. One of the things that we did was, after, regardless of shooting at 100 yards or 25 yards at gelatin or what our targets, we fired the shot, stopped, and then metal detected to recover that bullet in whatever place it might be. Of all the bullets that we fired at 25 yards, exclusive of the ones that were captured in the gelatin, and we did, I'll come to that in a minute, all went out to 100 yards and beyond, and we were recovering them. And they might have hit the palisade and embedded or bounced off of it or whatever. So we were collecting a lot of information on what a bullet does when it reaches its terminal velocity or still has velocity and what it strikes. So we have records not only of which gun was fired and how much gunpowder in it and the velocity of that weapon, but then we recovered the bullet. And about 85% recovery rate. So we, missed a few. That's not surprising. But in order to capture the bullet and see what happened in the ballistic gelatin, we had to what we call downcharge them. So we took the Colonial Fowler at 85 grains of gunpowder, downloaded it to 75 grains, fired it, and we were able to capture the bullet. But what was surprising there is the bullet still went through 16 inches of gelatin and then almost another 14 inches of gelatin and before we captured it. And it, when any bullet enters a tissue, there is a cavitation and a loss of kinetic energy as it's transferred from the bullet to the tissue. And there, literally, you can see in the high-speed footage shock waves of these things going through there. So we learned a lot about potential understanding of wounds and wounding abilities, capacity of these bullets, but also recovering them from the gelatin gave us an idea of what kind of deformation occurred in just going through tissue, as opposed to hitting log palisade or a sand berm or something.
Yeah. Did you, or do you plan to in the future, plan to add to those experiments with the gelatin, like simulate clothing? Because I know the clothing back then could have been, I mean, if it were wintertime, it could have been, miles of wool clothing that bullet had to go through first. So, which would probably slow it down quite a bit.
Right. Well, the cloth that we put on did simulate just a standard uniform, British, with their top coat, not an overcoat, but at their standard coat, or and then the waistcoat underneath it, the vest, and then a shirt. So that would be for most of the year. Yeah, a heavy top coat or overcoat over the top of that would have been interesting to do, and we'd like to do more of that. Long term, our goals are to do some of this live fire experimentation. We'd like to go back to Spanish colonial weapons and and even French colonial, the arquebus and the wheellocks and schnappbunds and things like that, and work our way through right on up to Civil War, and then later the guns that won the West sort of things, and shoot them and just look at all this data in a big database in comparison through changes of time. The main thing we're looking at is the function of black powder weapons. Modern smokeless powder weapons are well documented in the firearms literature and modern hunting literature, so those are not an issue. But it's these earlier black powder guns with very controlled experiments are really, really critical to understanding what we find in the archaeological sites, and particularly battlefields. And in particular, what we did with these colonial weapons in the live fire relates specifically back to work that had been done at Parker's Revenge, which is a component of the Minuteman National Historical Park, the April 19th, 1775 beginning of the American Revolution, where we found colonial Fowler bullets in what we believe to be a British line, and correspondingly a group of British size or caliber balls found where we think the militiamen or Minutemen were hidden in a woodlot. So on essentially the march back to Boston by the British regulars, and the sniping and small unit attacks that occurred to really decimate the British regulars as they marched back to Boston. So this information directly relates to how interpretations are occurring with that kind of archaeological information.
Okay. Now, I'm curious too as to some more of the setup of your experiment, because you mentioned having to, when you fire a weapon, having a metal detect to find the bullet, if it didn't embed itself in something or whatever. So this seems like it would have been a really kind of slow experiment to conduct, because you'd want each bullet from the last one that was fired and not to fire like 10 or 15 and then go find them all, because you need to correlate that with the firing, I would assume. So is that kind of how you guys did it, or did you have another process for that?
No, you described it just right on. What we did was measure and weigh the bullets before they were fired, and then fire the gun, go out and look for that particular bullet from that shot. So we only, from each shot. So it was a very slow process. It took us 3 days to accumulate data on about 75 shots from different guns. It was worth every bit of time. Not only was it just fun to shoot the guns and experience what a colonial militiaman or a British regular might have felt in using these, but we were also, able to recover those bullets and have knowing that it was fired at 785 feet per second. It went through the target frame, actually the pine frame of a target, went through that and struck the berm, and then we recovered it, and then we could look at the deformation on that. One of the things that a number of people have calculated or believe that, and I'm one of them, along with Dan Sivelich, that we can figure out whether it's a high, medium, or low velocity impact because of the type of deformation on a bullet, whether it's flattened, whether it's partially flattened, or it's just almost undamaged when it hits something, because it's the amount of velocity and the media at which it strikes. And Dan Sivelich has done a superb book on musket balls, particularly from the Revolution, but just understanding what happens to musket balls and how you can look at them archaeologically. But with the data we had, we were able to create a round ball deformation index that very much mirrors, it turns out, from trying to take it from an objective point of view, what mirrors what we had been saying, but we can now give some idea of approximate velocity that a bullet was going when it deforms. I think we used a numbering system, 1 through 3. Is little or none to moderate to significant. And it seems to be holding. And we also did a blind study of this. And Dan Sivelich, who knew we were doing this shooting, I sent him a number of the bullets that we had very, very good data on, and asked him, from your archaeological experience, what do you think this means? And he was able to identify the bullet to caliber, and he's got a formula for doing this, even though it's deformed, about 95% of the time, which is excellent. He also made determinations of what he believed to be the deformation, which was consistent with what we found. And this, just for interest, this formula he uses on deformed bullets. You can't get a diameter on them, so he weighs them, runs them through this formula. And since we knew the actual diameter of our bullet, and we also measured it after it was fired and weighed it and everything, so we know how much lead was lost, we ran a statistical correlation against his formula with our stuff, and it came out at 99.9, so it was okay. Yeah. So Dan did a superb job developing this formula.
That's results you can live with, yeah.
And our experiments were not just to see what these guns did, but to allow us to take this information, compare it back to archaeological assumptions, and see how valid we have been. So it's a validation process that we were doing here too.
And I don't think that's talked about enough. You hear a lot of conversations about doing the experiment in experimental archaeology, like, oh, we did this, we replicated this, these were our things, and this is what our results were. But I think doing the reverse kind of blind study on that, and then bringing in, for any type of experimental archaeology, bringing in somebody else that wasn't involved in the experiment and having them analyze the artificial archaeological record you just created, and have them analyze that from an archaeological standpoint and see if, hey, is the analysis that we're employing on actual archaeological sites actually giving us the right results? Because, by creating the experiment, you've created the initial conditions, and we don't know that for most archaeological sites. We're just assuming.
Yes, I'm in complete agreement with you. And that's why I find this experimental archaeological approach to be so valuable, and precisely for the reason when you do something and it turns out it looks like what the archaeological record has, we feel like we've achieved something. But if we don't do some of these blind studies and have somebody else look at them and say, oh, yeah, well, it makes sense, or did you consider that, or did you think of this? Look at those other parameters. Sometimes, as researchers, we don't get it all. Sometimes can't do it all either. Time and money always are a factor, but this particular set of experiments with these colonial weapons has opened up our eyes on some areas, and others were just verified what I think we're thinking. Yeah. But validation studies, which are done in a lot of the forensic field, just as a cross-check, and that's part of what my background is. It allows us to be more, to say we have rigorously tested something and we show that this is a valid way to do things. And we have to keep doing that because bits and things change, analytical techniques change, statistical methods of evaluation change. So if we don't keep experimenting or reusing the data and comparing it and contrasting it and revalidating it from time to time, I think we're making a mistake. We archaeologists tend to, I think, perceive that we understand the past from the artifacts and the context, and I believe that very strongly is absolutely accurate. But we need to test ourselves and keep testing ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. So in the last minute or two here, where are you guys going from here? Do you have any more similar experiments planned?
Well, we're working on that right now, several ideas. Probably the next one would be to move into Civil War weapons. Is there plenty of high-quality reproductions or even some very good preserved originals that we might be able to fire? It's getting everybody together and having the time and the resources to do this. But yeah, we're all very, very interested in it. And our report is available in a couple of different places online now. And so we want feedback from others. So we'd like to have people take a look at it and see what they think of it and give us their comments.
Yeah, and I can get those links from you, Doug, and we'll put those in the show notes. So go check out arcpodnet.com/archaeotech/54 for the episode number, and you should see a link to the report there right in the show notes. So, well, I'd like to thank you, Doug, for coming on, and I hope we can report back on some future experiments you guys do, or even some more results from these experiments, and let people know how it's going.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure to be with you on the show.
That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcast.network. www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.